economics explains a model of capitalism, neoclassical economics. I think that there is mine. That's a PhD theory, a PhD course in economics. Okay, two intersecting lines. It's all about equilibrium, and however you dress it up, you ultimately come back to the belief that the market economy returns to equilibrium after a shock, and that's the mental framework for mainstream neoclassical economics. It's a model which is internally flawed, and this is what I wrote up in my book Debunking Economics in great detail, because when you see where the theory began back in the 1870s with particularly with Leon Walras, he built a model of a market economy based on an extension to the Paris, I think it's Paris Bourse, which is a trading house which has a range of individual commodities, where there's a gold trading desk and a flour trading desk, etc., etc. And you bring all the buyers and all the sellers together. There's a bourse official there who is charged with setting the price so that supply equals demand in each of these isolated markets. And then Walras' model was to say, let's imagine a single big room where everybody comes in with all the commodities they've got, all the ones they want to buy, they have their own demand schedules and supply schedules as well. We have an auctioneer who happens to work costlessly, of course, who then starts with a random set of prices, and then where supply exceeds demand, he'll drop the price. Where demand exceeds supply, he'll increase the price. And this process of jiggling or atonement, Walras believed, would lead to equilibrium. And he actually went to get the endorsement of the world's leading mathematician at the time, Henri Poincaré, that this atonement process would converge. And Poincaré pointedly refused to agree with that. Then about 20 or 30 years later, in his applied mathematics, working out what are called the eigenvalues of a positive semi-definite matrix, which is the sort of matrix you need to describe that atonement process, a pair of mathematicians proved that the dominant eigenvalue is positive. And what that means is the system is unstable. Either prices are unstable or commodities are unstable. That process will not converge to equilibrium. So rather than saying, oh dear, because we've undermined our own theoretical starting point, we need a richer model where maybe we don't reach equilibrium, or there's some of the force involved, it was basically washed over. You only read about that sort of stuff in books like mine these days. Equally, there's what's called the Sonnenschein-Mantel-Gebr theorem, which showed that if you have a whole bunch of individuals who each have downward sloping individual demand curves, when you aggregate them, and you therefore have to allow that changing relative prices will change incomes, you can get any curve you want described by a polynomial. You do not necessarily get a downward sloping demand curve. So these are huge theoretical holes in the edifice of neoclassical economics, which they've just completely ignored. So we have a theory which is internally inconsistent and has been solved, apparently, in the same way that Aristotle's followers solved his problem of this model of the universe, which had the earth at the center and the stars and the planets on perfectly spherical spheres rotating around the earth. They added spheres on spheres, epicycles. And this is effectively what I see the neoclassicals are doing, adding shocks, random shocks to their equilibrium models, and then presuming the system will converge to equilibrium again. It's a mythical model. It's as realistic a model of capitalism as Ptolemy's model of the solar system was the model of the solar system. So it's neat, it's plausible, and it's wrong, and it's proved itself wrong internally and hasn't reformed itself. And I've given up on ever expecting them to do it. So I don't care whether I annoy neoclassical economists when I say this stuff, because I'm really talking to the young students, particularly the ones who came after the 2007 crisis, who formed Rethinking Economics. And I'm saying, don't listen to those guys, they're deluded. You might as well listen to Aristotle or Ptolemy on the universe as listen to those guys in economics.
Yeah, just following up on that, what do you think it would take for them to change?
I don't think they will. And again, this is where I think a lot of reading of history of economics, history of philosophy of science is very useful, because that's what Max Planck himself realized when he, by accident, invented quantum mechanics. If you look at how we went from the vision, the Maxwellian vision, which was an incredibly sophisticated vision electromagnetism. There's no disparaging Maxwell whatsoever here. But one of the predictions of Maxwell's equations was what's called the black body radiation phenomenon. The amount of radiative energy from an object at a range of different frequencies. And you got basically what looks like a pimple if you look at the shape of the spectrum of energy results coming out. And using Maxwell's equations, you could fit one side like that or the other side like that, but you couldn't get the pimple shape. So to get the pimple shape, to fit the data, Planck did what's known as integration of the complex plane and came up with something where there was energy came in quanta. Now, he didn't know what the hell it was. It was well before he had any of the philosophical and mathematical work that's come on since Planck. But it fitted the data. It explained the black body radiation problem. And Planck tried to convince his fellow Maxwellian physicists of this, and he finally gave up and wrote some of the best lines in the history of science, such as "Science progresses one funeral at a time." And the thing is, in science that does happen, in a genuine science where you have genuine respect for empirical findings, when these question your own assumptions. And so the young students who came through accepted quantum mechanics, and we finally got Einstein and quantum mechanics and everything coming out of that. And the old Maxwellian physicists who were still functional because as approximations, Maxwellian theory works very, very well. Anything above, micro scale or universal scale. So they disappeared, and we got the new, quantum mechanical relativity ultimately as well, vision of the physical world. And economics, you went through the 1920s, we went through the 1930s. We've had the financial crisis in 2007, and I can quote Paul Romer here, another Nobel Prize winner, one of the few that I think has got any reasonable claim to deserving some respect on that front, saying that when he was learning macroeconomics back in the 70s, I think it was 70s and 80s, so we've gone backwards for the last 30 years. So rather than progressing and confronting these points where the theory is internally inconsistent and is empirically false, rather than confronting them, it's continued refining itself to go back to its basis in neoclassical microeconomics. And I remember many times I'd be talking about economics after the financial crisis, which is something I was warning of from December of 2005, and speaking at seminars and so on. And I'd often get a young neoclassical, they tend to be the most rabid I find, saying something to me like, oh, there's a lot of problems with macro, but micro is pretty good. I go, yeah. Garbage. Do you ever seen how many firms actually have rising marginal cost? The answer is less than 5%. Okay. The empirical data finds declining marginal cost curves. Do you know you can't even derive a supply curve without perfect competition? I mean, there's mathematical errors in that. So you just can't convince them. The belief system is so plausible that they return to it all the time. And the fact that it doesn't fit the data is jumped over by leaving out significant events like 2007 as an outlier. And I think they've got reasons for leaving COVID out as an outlier, that's fair enough. But the 2007 crisis, to blame that on exogenous shocks, when the exogenous shocks are coming from the finance system, So no, I don't see any chance in getting them to revise their opinions. The only real hope I've got for economics is other disciplines such as engineering, physics, chemistry, biology, meteorology, because they've got the technical skills necessary, realising what an appallingly bad job the economists have done of coming in and taking over the field from them without the ideological baggage that the economists, mainly often unknowingly, bring to the party.